In 2005, one man stood before 23,000 people and changed the way the world thinks about life. Stanford University, June 12, 2005. The sun is blazing over one of the most prestigious campuses in the world. 23,000 people, graduates, families, professors, all gathered for one moment. And onto that stage walks a man in a simple black robe. No notes in his hand, no teleprompter, just a man. And the truth he carried inside him. His name was Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, creator of the iPhone, the iMac, the iPod, the man who put a computer in every pocket and a song in every ear. But today, he wasn't there as a CEO. He was there as a human being, a man who had been rejected, fired, broken, and diagnosed with cancer, and had survived all of it. He looked out at those thousands of faces and said, "I never graduated from college. And honestly, this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation." The crowd laughed. Then he said, "Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it, no big deal, just 3 stories." What followed in the next 15 minutes became the most watched commencement speech in human history. Over 40 million views on YouTube, translated into dozens of languages, studied in universities around the world. And today, I'm going to take you inside that speech, word by word, story by story. Because these are not just Steve Jobs' lessons. These are lessons for every single person who has ever felt lost, broken, or unsure of where their life is going. Let's begin. Steve Jobs' life was complicated before he even took his first breath. His biological mother was a young, unmarried graduate student. She was brilliant. She was brave, but she was not ready. She made the heartbreaking decision to give her son up for adoption. A well-educated couple agreed to take him, but the night he was born, they backed out. They had wanted a girl. It was late at night. A phone rang in a small house in Mountain View, California. Paul and Clara Jobs answered. "We have a baby boy. Do you want him?" Without hesitation, they said yes. But when Jobs' biological mother found out that this new family had never graduated from college, she refused to sign the adoption papers. She had one condition: "Promise me, you will send him to college." Paul and Clara looked at each other. They had no money, no savings, no guarantee, but they made the promise. And on that promise, Steve Jobs' life began. 17 years later, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Oregon. Reed was expensive, outrageously expensive, far beyond what his working-class parents could realistically afford, but they had made a promise. So every dollar they had saved went toward his education. And 6 months in, Jobs realized something. He had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. He had no idea how college was going to help him figure it out. And he couldn't bear watching his parents pour their entire life savings into something that felt meaningless to him. So he made one of the most terrifying decisions of his young life. He dropped out. Now, imagine being 18 years old. No degree, no plan, no money, sleeping on the floor of your friends' dorm rooms because you have nowhere else to go. Returning empty Coca-Cola bottles to collect 5 cents each, just to buy food. Walking 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one warm meal at a Hare Krishna temple. This was Steve Jobs. The man who would one day be worth over $10 billion, was scraping together nickels to survive. But here is what made all the difference. Dropping out gave him freedom. Freedom to wander. Freedom to wonder. Freedom to walk into any class he wanted, with zero pressure and pure curiosity. One afternoon, he wandered into a calligraphy class. Reed College had the finest calligraphy program in America at the time. Every poster, every notice board on campus was handcrafted with beautiful lettering. Jobs was fascinated. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces. He learned about the art of spacing, how the distance between letters could make words feel alive or dead. He learned what made typography not just readable, but beautiful. It was artistic, it was historical, and it had absolutely zero practical application in his life. Or so he thought. 10 years later, Jobs was designing the first Macintosh computer, and everything he had learned in that calligraphy class came flooding back. He built beautiful typography directly into the Mac. Multiple typefaces, proportional spacing, fonts that felt human, not mechanical. The Macintosh became the first computer in history with truly beautiful type. And when Microsoft built Windows, They looked at the Mac and did the same. Which means, every laptop, every phone, every screen you have ever read words on, carries the fingerprint of a broke 18-year-old who wandered into a calligraphy class with no plan. Jobs said, "You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, karma, life, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. Whatever you're going through right now, whatever feels random, painful, or pointless, trust it. The dots are being placed. You just can't see the picture yet." Steve Jobs was 20 years old when he found his purpose. In 1976, in a small garage in Los Altos, California, Jobs and his best friend Steve Wozniak started a company. They had no investors, no office, no blueprint, just two young men, a soldering iron, and an idea that most people thought was ridiculous. They called it Apple. 10 years later, Apple was a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. They had just launched the Macintosh, the most revolutionary personal computer the world had ever seen. Jobs was 30 years old. He was on the cover of magazines. He was celebrated as a genius. He was at the absolute peak of everything he had ever dreamed of. And then, in a single boardroom meeting, it was gone. The board of directors of Apple, the company he had built with his own hands, his own blood, his own sleepless nights, fired him. How does someone get fired from their own company? Jobs had hired a man named John Sculley, the former CEO of Pepsi, to help run Apple. He had personally convinced Sculley to join with one of the most famous lines in the history of business. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley joined, and for a while, it worked. But slowly, their visions began to clash. Their ideas pulled in opposite directions. And when it came to a vote, the board chose Sculley. At 30 years old, Steve Jobs was out, publicly, painfully, completely. He said, "I was devastated. I had been a very public failure. I even thought about running away from Silicon Valley entirely. For months, he didn't know who he was anymore. He felt like he had failed an entire generation." He met with David Packard, co-founder of Hewlett-Packard. He met with Bob Noyce, co-founder of Intel, two of the greatest men in technology. And Jobs looked them in the eye and apologized for failing. But then, slowly, something shifted inside him. He realized he still loved the work. Being fired from Apple hadn't taken that away. He still loved building things. He still loved creating. He still loved the feeling of turning an idea into something real. So he made a decision. He would start over. And what happened next is one of the greatest second acts in the history of human achievement. He founded a new company, Next, a computing platform so advanced, so ahead of its time, that the world wasn't ready for it. Then he took a chance on a small, struggling animation studio that nobody believed in. That studio was called Pixar. Under Jobs' leadership, Pixar created the world's first fully computer-animated feature film, Toy Story. Released in 1995, Toy Story became a cultural phenomenon. It made over $373 million worldwide. And Pixar went on to create some of the most beloved films in human history: Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Wall-E, Up. Films that made generations of children believe in the power of imagination. And then, Apple came calling. Apple was struggling without Jobs. They needed new technology. They bought Next. And Steve Jobs walked back through the doors of the company that had thrown him out. The technology he had built at Next became the beating heart of everything Apple created next. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. Products that didn't just change Apple, they changed civilization. Jobs stood on that Stanford stage and said, "I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I think the patient needed it. Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. The only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. Then he said the words that every person in that crowd needed to hear. You've got to find what you love. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. Don't settle. Those two words are worth more than any degree, any salary, any title. Don't settle. When Steve Jobs was 17 years old, he read a single sentence that changed everything. It said, "If you live each day as if it were your last, someday you'll almost certainly be right." That sentence never left him. Every single morning, for 33 years, Jobs would stand in front of a mirror and ask himself one question. If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And whenever the answer was no for too many days in a row, he knew something had to change. He said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important." And then, in 2003, it stopped being philosophy. One morning, Jobs went in for a routine scan. The results showed a tumor in his pancreas. The doctors sat him down and told him it was almost certainly incurable. He had 3 to 6 months to live. They told him to go home, to say everything he needed to say to the people he loved, to get his affairs in order, to prepare for the end. Imagine that moment, sitting in a doctor's office, being told, "You have months." Not years, not decades, months. That evening, Jobs had a biopsy. Doctors guided an endoscope down his throat, through his stomach, into his intestines, and carefully removed cells from the tumor. Jobs was sedated. He saw nothing. But his wife was there, and she told him later that when the doctors looked at those cells under the microscope, they started to cry. Not from sadness, from relief. It was an extraordinarily rare form of pancreatic cancer, one of the only types that could be treated with surgery. Jobs had the operation, and he survived. He stood on that Stanford stage, alive, and said, "That was the closest I've ever come to dying, and I hope not to face it again for many decades." Then he paused and delivered the most important words of the entire speech. Death is probably the single best invention of life. It is life's change agent. It clears out the old to make room for the new. Right now, you are the new. But someday, not too far from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. He looked directly at those graduates and said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary." Then he smiled and told one final story. When Jobs was young, there was a magazine called the Whole Earth Catalog. To his generation, it was extraordinary. Created by a man named Stewart Brand, built without computers, without design software, just typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. Jobs called it Google in paperback form. 35 years before Google existed, Stewart Brand and his team published the magazine for years. And then they stopped. In the mid-1970s, they released their final issue. Jobs was around the same age then as the graduates sitting before him now. On the back cover of that final issue was a photograph. A quiet country road, early morning light, mist rising from the fields. The kind of road that makes you want to just start walking, with no destination, and trust that you'll find your way. Beneath that photograph, 4 words. Just 4 words. That became the most famous closing line in the history of public speaking. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Jobs looked out at 23,000 people. Young faces full of fear and hope and everything in between. And he said, "That has always been my wish for myself. And now, as you graduate and begin your new lives, I wish it for you. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Thank you, all very much." Steve Jobs left that stage on June 12, 2005. 6 years later, on October 5th, 2011, he was gone. He was 56 years old. But the 3 stories he told that day live on. Connect the dots, even when you can't see the picture. Love what you do, even when the world tells you to stop. Remember you will die, and let that truth set you free. Stay hungry, stay foolish, and go. Change the world.